Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Staying Relevant to Customers in Crisis. This is part of our Selling in the New Normal webinar series. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few things to help you get the most from today's event. You've logged in via computer audio by default. If you cannot hear or your connection is unclear, you can try logging out and back in first, or you can try to join over the phone. Select the arrow next to the microphone icon in the toolbar to give options. Click Switch to Phone Setting to show a list of dial-in numbers or ask it to call you. Everyone is muted to ensure an excellent audio quality. Today, you may submit questions at any time by typing into the question pane accessed via the toolbar. We will do our best to incorporate them during the session. However, due to a very large number of attendees, we apologize in advance if we're unable to get to your question. We'll provide resource links at the end where you will get more information. In addition, you will receive a post-conference email with a link to the recording of today's presentation and a copy of the slides. And now, I'd like to introduce you to your host, Mark Grimshaw.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for the third in our webinar series, which has been designed to deliver practical insights and assets that you can use immediately to move your business forward. And today's topic is staying relevant to customers in crisis, which, as this unprecedented situation continues, and it looks like it will for some time, becomes more and more important to us all. And so the reality, I think, is that our markets and customers have changed. And we need to find ways to change with them and support them in the way that they need to be supported, and essentially how to remain relevant in these disruptive situations. I actually looked back over my calendar over the weekend and frankly scared myself a little bit. Firstly, I'm really busy. I seem to have almost no time spare in the day. The actual number of calls, or the percentage of my time spent on customer calls, has reduced by about a quarter between week one of this and now. So I'm making 25% fewer calls to customers, which I was really surprised about. And secondly, the number of different customers that I'm calling is also reducing, is also in decline. And kind of simply put, in my own talking to myself, I need to think through my call strategy and deliberately work through why these clients, many of whom I have known for years, will actually want to take my call, and why will they welcome spending their time with me. And this webinar is here to give you some insight and a framework to help answer those questions. So if we go to the next slide, our content today is split into three sections. And firstly, we'll try and put this into context by looking at some of the research that underpins the buyer-seller relationship. Next, we'll review and discuss the importance of deep discovery, especially in the world of COVID-19. And then lastly, we'll walk you through a matrix framework, and we'll leave it with you as well at the end, that will help you improve your approach to staying relevant to your customers. So next slide, we have a packed agenda. So let me introduce your team for today. I'm Mark Grimshaw. I've been in sales and leadership and consultancy roles for around 20 years with Hewlett-Packard, Cable & Wireless and McKinsey. And now I help lead the sales effectiveness practice at Korn Ferry. And I'm joined today by three colleagues and friends. Diana Weigand has been practicing and teaching sales effectiveness for over 20 years. She's held the bag of a seller, sales leader, and has led global sales transformation, and has been a customer and a consultant for Miller Heiman Group Korn Ferry for over a decade. Pat Mustico, or Dr. Pat as we like to call him, has extensive experience as a salesperson, a sales manager and an executive. And he's been a sales consultant with us for over 10 years and last served as the VP of sales for the Americas for Huthwaite. For those of you that don't know, they were the creators of spin selling. Pat now is a lead consultant working with Korn Ferry. But first up, we have Chris Cowan to see what the data says about our world as salespeople. Chris is a 30-year veteran in the sales domain, having worked in roles from frontline seller to chief sales officer, and is now one of our senior sales consultants. Chris blends the art of science and selling in his approach and delivers practical solutions to help clients address their sales challenges. So a great panel for you today, and over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Mark. Again, I'm Chris Cowan, and I'm your setup man today. I'm going to provide some context for the selling environment we're in by sharing some research and implications of that research on the buyer-seller dynamic. I think it's very clear we're all dealing with change, and dare I say, unprecedented change. This is having a massive ripple effect across all aspects of our business and personal lives, to the point that the permutations of such are very hard to comprehend. So what does this mean for engagements with you and your prospects or clients? In challenging times like these, where so many are experiencing difficulty, it's easy to fall into a negative mindset and assume that everyone is in a similar situation. However, a recent quote, I think, shed some light on this, that we're all in the same storm, but we're not necessarily all in the same boat. So when you look first at the macro industry view, there's a full spectrum of financial performance. Some companies are in hypergrowth. Just try to lay your hands on hand sanitizer or a webcam, and you'll figure out who those companies are. Other companies are relatively stable. And then there's others who have been very hard hit, like travel and energy, to name a couple highly visible ones. This is what we can see with all publicly available information. But what is going on at the next level down with your target company, your target prospect specifically? There could be supply chain disruption, distribution issues, particularly if they operate globally. In my opinion, the biggest wild card is how is their leadership choosing to respond to these changes? Are they hunkering down and taking a bunker mentality, or are they taking a more aggressive approach to try to come out of this crisis ahead of the competition? Needless to say, there is a lot to consider and uncover. And lastly is the individual and personal issues. Remember, the company's not buying from you, the buyer's buying from you. So what has changed in their world and in their sphere of influence? So the point here is a lot of moving parts, tremendous number of implications that you need to factor into your sales approach, and you need to re-examine and adjust accordingly. Everyone's dealing with the change. It's your job to figure out the specific impacts to your prospects or clients. I have a short story to illustrate the kind of permutations that can happen in this environment. A client of mine recently transferred into a new company into the VP of sales role. He did this about 3 months ago. Now, the nature of this new company was such that I would have been hard hit by the pandemic. So I shot him a note a couple of weeks ago saying to the effect, tough time to move into this position. And let me know if you have some time. We can brainstorm a bit how to come out of this. Now, the note I got back, I didn't anticipate. He said, hey, Chris, thanks for the note, but I'm flat out. Maybe we can meet in a couple of months. Our management decided to retool our operations and move from water purification to air purification. And now we're swamped trying to fulfill products to make ventilators. I mean, this was something I couldn't have anticipated, but it just illustrates the kind of change we're dealing with and the kind of situations you have to adapt to. Page on what the selling environment looked like just prior to COVID. Over the past 5 years, in our annual benchmark report, our world-class sales practices report, we just saw a distinct trend emerging. In the booming economy, we saw very positive company plan attainment numbers. In other words, companies were hitting their revenue target. However, individual salesperson metrics were on the decline. As you can see here, lead conversion down 13%, quota attainment down 10%. Deals were becoming more complex with more than 6.4 buyers involved in decision making. That's a lot of sellers and a lot of selling actions to manage. And because of that, because of the complexity, sales cycles are becoming elongated, averaging more than 5 months. So what we've been hearing anecdotally from our engagements with our sales leaders, and it's being proven out in research, is that it indeed is getting harder to sell. Customer dynamics are changing, expectations are changing, and it's our belief that this will only be compounded in this current environment. So why were salespeople struggling? What was changing in their relationship with buyers? We decided to ask this question of buyers and launched another research project. This was our 2019 buyer preferences study, and you'll get a copy of this in the follow-up to this webinar. We asked buyers a number of questions to better understand the dynamic between buyers and sellers, with an eye towards what can sellers do to break out of these downward trends. Before I share some of the data on this, I'm going to launch a quick poll. So the first question we asked the buyers was, what percentage of sellers exceeded your expectations? Less than 25%, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75%, or 76 to 100%? Again, what percentage of sellers actually exceed buyer expectations. So vote now. And while the voting is going on, I'll just share some background on this research. So this research was done with 500 buyers in organizations greater than $250 million in revenue and had buying authority of transactions greater than $10,000. We found the results to be fascinating. We look forward to sharing that complete study with you. So Donna, are we starting to see some of the results coming in?
We have an enormous number of people voting. Can we give it about 4 or 5 seconds here?
Okay, absolutely.
And go.
Okay, so kind of as I expected, because it was a bit of a leading question given the research. Most people, 57%, are saying less than 25% exceeded buyer expectations. And looks like we've got a combined 91% below 50%. So directionally, everybody is on target. Let's go to the next page and see what the research actually said. So only 32% of sellers actually exceed buyer expectations. If you understand Net Promoter Score, what this means is that if you're not exceeding expectations, you're actually failing. You're at risk, and you're at risk of being displaced by another seller. Next page, please, Pat. So sellers are just okay, but not adding a lot of value. We then ask, where do buyers turn for resources on how to solve their business problems? Specifically, we ask, what are the top 3 sources you go to? So out of a list of 10, salespeople rank 9th. I mean, look at this. They'd rather go to a website than go to the person they buy from. So this is a little bit depressing, but there is a silver lining. If you look at the place they go first, SMEs and industry experts, we believe salespeople can become the industry expert if you change your approach and if you add value, insights, and perspective to each and every engagement. Next page, Pat. So the picture that this research begins to paint, we term the apathy loop, and it goes something like this. Remember, we saw that from a buyer's perspective, I think salespeople are fine. 60+% meet my expectations, but they're not exceeding them. So what happens? They don't view them as great problem solvers, sources of information, and so they turn elsewhere to develop their solutions. So buyers engage sellers. Actually, later in the process, a full 70% won't engage sellers until they're at the point of defining their solution. So what's the result? Salespeople are put into a box. There's very little room to differentiate yourself and help shape the client's thinking and concepts. As a result, this takes us back to the beginning. Salespeople are just okay. By and large, they meet my expectations. And this is a difficult cycle to break. Everybody knows in selling, apathy is one of the most difficult kinds of objections to overcome. So how do we break this vicious cycle? We ask buyers, would you be willing to engage sellers earlier? And a full 90% say they would engage earlier if the challenge was new, risky, or complex. In other words, this brave new world that we're selling in today. And therein lies your opportunity. We then ask, what would you expect from sellers, and what would they need to do to exceed your expectations? The 2 most prominent answers and the most relevant to today's discussion are as follows. And again, these aren't rocket science. These are fundamentals. But what we know from our research is that many sellers don't execute on these fundamentals on a consistent basis. So number 1, they said, know my business. Do your homework. Don't waste my time by having me explain to you what we do. Ask informed questions that suggest you're trying to get to a level deeper in the understanding of what they do and how you can help them beyond what's available in public information. And number 2, provide insights and perspective. Educate me, enlighten me, make me look smarter, give me thought leadership, help me look good by giving me the right context to make the recommendation for you as my vendor. So perspective is a real differentiator, we believe, but it is set up, absolutely set up by good research. You can't provide salient perspective if you don't understand through research what's important. Perspective is nuance. It surrounds the ability to understand a client's needs and provide them with a clear understanding of how you can help them fulfill those needs. There's a big element of that elusive skill of business acumen embedded in perspective. So what does perspective ultimately deliver? It helps advance the buyer's process by providing new ideas and helping to shape their concept. It helps them expand their vision of what's possible and their ability to shape a new vision for success. And lastly, and most importantly, it positions you as the seller in a different light, as a problem solver, as a source of best practices, and as an industry expert that adds value in each and every interaction. So let's turn to know my business, and that starts with research and informed discovery. And this is where I'll turn it over to my colleague and fellow consultant, Diana Weigand.
Thanks, Chris. So the onus is on us as sellers. What are we going to do differently so we show up well, is usually what I say. And it's with this deeper understanding of the preferences of your buyers that I'm going to dive into the importance of deep discovery and how it can differentiate you as a seller and your organization more than ever. So we know that to be relevant, you must expand your knowledge of your customer. That's table stakes. We need to know what's going on in their industry. We need to know what's going on with their customer base. And then what are the trends that they're experiencing? What's the competitive landscape look like? Essentially, we're looking at a situational assessment. And again, the onus is on us as a seller to do this situational assessment. It's not new news at all, but it is becoming more and more critical. Typically what I see when working with selling organizations is our natural tendency is to go to LinkedIn as a starting point. We may go to social media, we may go to Twitter, or we may look at other mediums, maybe even the client's website. What we're finding is that's not enough. Looking at what are the industry trends, what's the industry research say, where are they taking their organization? And often we find that requires some inroads into the organization. So connecting with what we call coaches is becoming more and more critical. So for us, a coach is someone in the organization that has credibility and insight of some of the strategic decisions that are going on within the client. And you connecting with them is a must-do at this point. Things are changing daily, weekly at the very least. So last week, I thought I'd bring in, we hosted a happy hour for our selling, for our clients who listened to the webinars last week. And there was a common theme that kind of came out. Many clients were asking, how do we engage with customers? How do we do business development in this new norm that we're living in? And the theme that came out was be human. And to be human, you have to know your customer. You can't just be pitch focused or product focused. You need to know the person you're talking to, the industry they're working in, and what's going on daily in their organization. And it's with this type of information that you can begin to break out of the apathy loop that Chris mentioned. So I thought I'd bring forward an example of a client I'm working with in the advertising space. Before we get to that, Chris, or Pat, if we can just step back one, thanks. It's really interesting. So this, in the advertising space, this is an industry that's been significantly hit by COVID-19. Clearly, there's no new ads being produced, and everyone's having to work remote in a very collaborative type of industry. And the client I was working with a major automaker, another group that's also, or industry that's also a bit hit hard. And one of the things that they're looking at, especially in Europe, is they're looking at rebooting their manufacturing now that they're flattening the curve, and testing is actually starting to help. They know that this production capacity will happen over time. So the selling team that I'm referencing actually was looking to provide perspective. They did their homework. They took the time to look at the industry, to look at the client, and to look at the individuals that they were meeting with. And they chose a unique approach. They decided to take the industry insights, their homework that they did, and put it on a slide. And that's how they started the dialogue with the client. And the interesting feedback at the end of that meeting was the customer stated, no other vendor has showed up like that, which is unfortunate news. But there is an opportunity there for us as a selling team, because the client said they were super impressed that they actually took the time to learn more about them. And it's also what opened the gate to more conversation in that meeting. Lastly, I think most importantly, which was really insightful, was not only did they win the business, but the client said to them, you know what, this is the type of partner I want to do business with. I want to be in a partnership with an organization that cares about me, my industry, and my organization. So we're going to take a few moments now for the rest of our time here, and we're going to walk through an example. We're going to use the media industry. While we all know this industry is hit hard in crisis, it's also one that we as humans are relying upon for up-to-date information. So within that industry, while they're very constrained and challenged, there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of challenges. So Pat, if you can advance the next slide. We're going to leverage Warner Brothers as an example. Warner Media, they're actually in this space. And if I'm a seller and I'm starting to do this research, often you find sellers Google. It's their best tool out there for finding information. And just by putting Warner Brothers in, you can see they're looking for new content. They're looking to reinvent the content as their audiences are now home more now than ever. The kids are at home because they're schooling from home. And what are we going to do to advance the viewership? We also know, if you go to the next slide, Pat, that they're anticipating some increase in viewership. Well, that makes a lot of sense given today's situation. You know, to me, that starts to beg some questions. What's our technology capacity? Do we have the right throughput? Do we have the right access globally? And last but not least, you can even see further that they're trying to actually stay as that trusted source that we are relying the media organizations on to give us a series of PSAs, stay informed, and so that that viewership is dedicated and committed to Warner Brothers. So just by looking at Google alone, you see new content, you see the ability to give back with PSA and some social awareness that's going on. All of that basic search really starts to beg some questions. How can I and my organization help my customers during this time of crisis? What objectives of that organization are starting to change? Are there any new ambitions or new avenues or opportunities that the organization is starting to look at? And what implication does that have on the customer? So questioning becomes a critical component of good discovery. You do your research and then you can pull in those questions. Last week, we actually had a webinar that we're going to bring forward again on May 7th. And we introduced what we call the Big Six, which is questions that really can have an impact on a sales conversation early on in the discovery. I encourage you to actually sign up for that next session on May 7th. And also with that comes a download of these fantastic questions that were created. So I'm going to take this exercise.
Diana, sorry,
Oh,
Diana,
yes.
just for a second.
Yeah,
So a stack of questions have come in. So let me try and amalgamate them into one if I can. We'll answer the questions in the chat in the question box as we go along. But the crux of it was what pitfalls or challenges are you frequently seeing with sellers in doing research? What are the things they're finding difficult?
Yeah, great question, Mark. You know, the first and foremost is sellers are getting caught up in tedium, internal work, and they're not dedicating time for research, time to prepare and plan for those questions so that when they show up and they're talking to their customers, they're well-versed and well-informed. The other piece is that I see is we still have this product pitch mindset. And that product pitch mindset really becomes very pushy and not very account-centric or relationship-centric. And so you get some resistance often from your customers if you stay in that pitch mindset. So we really need to shift our mindset to an account-based mindset, account relationship mindset, as we're thinking about the research, the implications. What questions does it beg of you if you're the seller and you own this business? How would you actually want to engage with another vendor?
That's great. Thank you, Dan. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there were loads of questions. So I just wanted to make sure we got some of them across.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's great. So I'm going to hand over now the remainder of our time to Pat Mustico, and he's going to discuss how do we bring this perspective and leverage a tool that you can take away immediately post our session here today to have a better plan as you engage with your clients. Pat?
Thank you, Diana, and good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it might be for those listening. Just to start off, I'll start with a quick story. When I was first selling, all of my managers, and there were a number in my first couple of years, but they all would say to me, you know, Pat, if we can just create value, we're going to win this deal. Pat, go be a value add, and we're going to win this deal. You know, things like that. And of course, my mindset was, well, gee, thanks, boss. If I knew how to do that, I would have done it. So thanks for nothing, because that really doesn't tell me how to go do any of that. It just says go create value. So what I'd like to do is kind of bridge the gap between what Chris and Diane were talking about when it comes to research and why it's so important to actually how do we go do it? How can I create value and provide perspective? And when I say value and perspective, they're not quite interchangeable, but they're real close. And the perspective we're going to talk about is how do we create it? What do we do with it? And how do we continue to move forward? So once we've done all this great research that Diana talked about, what do we do with it? So let me just share 4 ways that we can actually think through before we go talk to a client how to add perspective. And the first one of those is help them with the problem they didn't know exist, an unrecognized problem. So you being an industry expert in whatever industry you're in, you probably have more information about their problems, about how your products and services solve their problems and how your products and services give them opportunities. Help them see that problem in a way, one, they didn't see before, or maybe they never saw it coming at all. So help them see that unrecognized problem. The second is an unanticipated solution. Just like the problem, Chris shared that early on, research is being done by the buyer. And during that research, they help craft their own problem. They help see what different solutions are out there. So if we as salespeople come to them and say, hey, we have a solution that they already knew about, we're not offering any perspective. We're not offering any value. We've got to be smarter than the web page they went to craft that solution. So we've got to give them insights and perspective into the solution they have, or come up with something very creative that they didn't even know existed. Thirdly, we can help them with opportunities they never saw coming. So we know we have a product or service out there and it fits a need. They may not even know they have a problem or a particular need, but because of our expertise and insights, we're able to bring them an unseen opportunity that they can now utilize and help serve their clients and serve their business. Last but not least, I'm going to say this kind of backwards as I normally do, but if a salesperson cannot do one of those things, if you can't do one of those things, invite somebody in who can. Have them be a broker of capabilities. And a broker of capabilities comes in really 2 forms. One is introducing people. Be that expert, be that one phone call so that your clients know if they call you, you can put them in touch with somebody that knows exactly what's going on. And number 2 of broker capabilities is bring forth the entire weight of your company. Don't just sell a service. Don't just help with a service or a product. Bring to bear the entire scope of your product base so that you can actually provide a lot more value across the base. That's being a broker capabilities. When we do our homework, when we do the research, and then we go and categorize this research and we use our experience and our knowledge to categorize what we can do in these 4 buckets, creating value, engineering perspective becomes much easier as we continue to move on and be relevant to our client. The other piece to this is, where do we put this information? We put it in what we call a value matrix. So let's pretend I'm a social media content provider and I am working with Warner Brothers on a kids TV program. So as you look at this value matrix, across the top is very simple. What issues are the customers having? What problems and opportunities does that issue create? What are the implications and payoffs of those problems or opportunities? And very, very importantly, who cares? Who cares about those problems? And you can't say things like the executives or the C-suite or salespeople or whatever that might be. Be very specific about positions you deal with or want to deal with. What buying influences do you talk to? Be very specific on that. Who cares? Then think about the capabilities you have as an individual, as a company, to support their goals, their needs, to help them out of this problem. And then create a hypothesis about the perspective that you can provide. And when we do that, it looks sort of like this. One, let's say they can't make new programs. Here's some of the problems and opportunities that that can create. Now from that, I'm going to create a whole bunch of implications. They're losing eyeballs to programming. They can't expand their audience, right? Who cares about those things? Well, I know a social media director cares about that because my company does social media, so I want to keep them in the loop. That's the contact I have. The director of those kids' TV program cares. The producers of that TV program care, and certainly the CFO cares about those sorts of things. My capability to serve can help them with things like media exposure, social media specifically. I have teams ready and willing to support, and I have experience repurposing existing TV material content to social media. So my hypothesis is that I can help them use animation. I can help them repurpose some of these things. I can use these outtakes and repurpose it for social media, and I can get a lot of interaction. So I just kind of think through that. But as you might imagine, the value matrix isn't just one issue. It really is a number of issues. So I focused on a problem for the first example, and then maybe I focused on an opportunity for the second. But what I really want to do is collect my thoughts. I want to think through those unrecognized problems, unanticipated solutions, unseen opportunities. I want to figure out who else do I need to broker in order to have these great conversations. But now that I've really thought through this and I have some of the perspective I want to bring to them, I think about, okay, who really cares? Who are the people I need to talk to make this happen? And what we'll see here is when I take this who cares, I move it to what I call a who cares matrix. And in this who cares matrix, you'll see across the top the different personas that I identified. The social media director, the director of the program, a producer, a CFO. And then I just want to take in this matrix, what problems and opportunities do they have? What short-term goals and metrics are they looking at for those goals? And then what perspective can I specifically provide to that individual? Now, notice I said perspective to that individual. My perspective is not going to be the same for each one of these people. So for instance, a social media director, they're worried about creating great content in a short amount of time. Do they have enough staff to do these things, right? Some opportunities are they're going to be able to expand their capabilities. But in the short term, they really got to make sure that they're not compromising quality, that they're getting projects out on time. And the way they're going to hold themselves, or their boss is going to hold them accountable, is, are they meeting those timelines? Is their audience size on social media growing, or is it stagnant? So the perspective I can add to the social media director in particular is, we have teams. My company, this is what I specialize in, right? I'm a social media creation company. My teams are ready to create activities, projects, help with project management in order to make an effective social media for this kids camp for the TV program. A director is going to have a little bit different, a producer is going to have a little bit different, and a CFO is going to have a little bit different perspective. So let's take the director. The director is worried about crew layoffs and losing the crew to other projects, missing deadlines. Well, we can help with that because we can help repurpose some of that video crew to social media with some transferable skills. So we can solve some of those problems. For a producer, they might be worried about losing investors and losing locations for these TV programs. Well, they might be happy to hear that their investors are going to be thrilled because we can offer them a new audience. We can offer them platforms and exposure to new audiences, and even better yet, to new advertisers on this social media feed. So that's how we use these two value matrices together.
Hey Pat, just before you move on, again, a stack of questions coming in. Let me just try and interrupt you for a couple of them. So two for you. The first one's about the templates, and the second one's about becoming an expert. So the first question I have for you is, aren't these templates all a bit formal? I mean, they're physically written down, but aren't they all a bit formal? Especially since we don't kind of have the words that are in them. So just help us out a bit with the is it really as simple as that?
The question was about, is this a bit formal? And it may appear a bit formal to some. But here's the thing, what opportunities aren't worth this sense of formality? As Chris shared earlier, there's like 6.5 people involved in a very complex decision, especially in a crisis. So to be relevant, we've got to get our message straight. And that kind of, that kind of formality is important. But here's what I would stress. If you follow the formality for a little while, then this becomes a way of thinking. And it doesn't have to necessarily be as formal. You may not have to type out the bullets like I shared. It can simply become a way you think and a conversation you have with everybody involved in the opportunity. So I hope that answers the question. Is that fair, Mark?
It does, Pat. We have just one other for you as well, and this has come up in a number of different people, a number of different forms. The particular question was, I'm an account manager looking after 50 accounts across multiple industries. So how do we become experts on our clients' businesses? That kind of seems unrealistic. Do you have any? And if others have a thought as well, it'd be great.
Yeah, so first off, thanks for 2 questions instead of just 1, by the way. Listen, nobody expects you to know more about your customer than your customer. You need to know about how your products fulfill their needs and desires. So we've got to think about problems, not products, but at the same time, as we do this research, we've got to understand how our products and services are going to support their needs. That's the expertise you have to build through this. It's not becoming expert on how to sell car parts or batteries, or in this case, TV programs or whatever it might be. You don't need to know all about video production, that sort of thing. But what we do need to know is, through research and through conversation, what are the problems they're experiencing and how can we, with our products and services, support them? So don't feel like you need to be the expert on everything about everything in their business, but you do need to be an expert on how your products and services support their business, especially in times of crisis like we're experiencing right now.
Hey, Mark, it's Diana. I'd like to just add a comment back to the client that I was working with in the selling team. When I hear that question, I have got multiple accounts across multiple industries. Often what I hear is sellers believe that research is an analysis paralysis and it takes a lot of time. The example that I provided, the selling team told me it was a half hour of them doing research and putting their minds together as a team before they showed up to the client and preparing for that. So if you think about, as you engage with your client and look at your funnel, you take some dedicated time, 15 minutes, 30 minutes max, to prep for that conversation. And it makes a world of difference. So don't assume that it's going to consume your entire schedule, but you do need to dedicate some time to do the research, and it will pay off.
Mark, if I could just add one thing to this. I think with the 50 customers, right, apply Pareto's law, right? What's the 80-20 on those 50 customers? Where are you going to get the best? Second point, and this addresses the first question, is when you go out and do your research and you pull from multiple sources. So Diana highlighted a Google search. I like to go to the company's website and see what they're saying about themselves. What are their PR releases? And what are some of the other sources that you can find? I like to go to analyst reports. How are the analysts looking at their performance? And what I find in this is that these are just dots. And all of a sudden, as you do 5 or 6 stops in different research, it starts to paint a picture. And it gives you an hypothesis that any one of those stops might not have given you, right? And so there's a bit of downtime after the research where you need to turn your thinking cap on and look at what it's telling you and start to form some hypotheses about your approach.
That's really helpful, thank you. And as I said, we will try to get to most of the questions in the when we go through the section afterwards, and we'll respond to all the individual questions, because there were a stack on this. So thank you all 3 of you, really helpful. So Pat, back over to you. Hopefully we can see the slide deck again now.
Yeah, so I don't know if you can see the slides. I can, but once we've done all that research, we have to start thinking now about what are we willing to give, right? In times of crisis, it's a crisis. And we have to think about, what are we willing to give in an effort? We have to be true to our company. We have to be true to what we can do, but maybe we can get really creative on what we can do for the clients. It might be getting really creative on the financial terms, payment terms. It might be worry about that stuff later and get them the help and support they need now. But we want to encourage you to think about giving before asking, giving before getting from the client base. And that's extremely important once you determine, especially, the different perspective you can bring. So with that, last but not least, I want to kind of throw out a challenge to everyone. And that challenge is very simple. And if you don't mind, you can actually scan the QR code here and fill in the blanks. But what I'd like you to do is just think through really quick of those different 4 value drivers, the way that we can provide perspective. Take a picture of that QR code, and it's just going to ask you for an example or 2 that you've provided before, or something that you think you can provide to your customers. Kind of force yourself to go through the exercise of, what are problems that they don't see that you do? What are solutions that you have that they don't anticipate? How can you be creative in that solution? What opportunities are out there that they haven't seen before that you can really help and support their company? And then last but not least, who might you need to broker in? What might you need to broker in to help support them? So please take a minute and take that challenge. It'll be up for a while. Take a picture of that QR code if you can't do it right this minute. But please take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll push back those different responses out back to the team. So with that, let me pass it back to Mr. Mark Grimshaw.
So thank you, Pat, and a huge thank you to Chris, Diana, and Dr. Pat for their insight and the framework we have here, and an equally big thank you to all of you for joining us and spending your time with us today. Please do have a go at the challenge. It'll be fascinating to see the questions that you're asking in these very different times. We've been running this for a while now, so I'm fascinated to see just how it changes. And just in case you're in any way competitive, we ran a challenge in our first webinar, and we have over 300 answers so far to that first challenge. So let's see if we can top that as a team today. As promised, you can download the tools that Pat went through with the QR code on this page, so it'll give you a copy of the sheet, so you can use that for your own, for your own use, and work out how you might, using the, as Pat has said, the formality, and then put your own personal slant on it, I guess, in terms of the value. And as I said, we'll email you a copy of this deck and the full deck, so you have it for your own use too. And finally, just one reminder to say that we're in a series of webinars here, so I hope what you've seen today will encourage you to come back and listen to the rest. And note also that we've put the first webinar we're rerunning on the 7th of May, just because we had such an influx of people for that. We couldn't let everybody in, and so we're just going to rerun that from there. And then finally, don't forget we have a happy hour that we run on Thursday. It's an informal opportunity for you to feed in and input to your thoughts on this. And there have been loads on this webinar, and thank you so much for all of that. But Pat and Diana and Chris will all be on that with the other speakers of the week. It's a happy hour on Thursday, so please join us. Which just leads me to say, and I mean this genuinely in our world, that thank you all for coming. Please look after yourselves and also those around you. It's important. Thanks ever so much. Bye-bye.